You've been hunting for a sim racing wheel that won't feel like a half-finished hobby upgrade, something that just works every time you sit down and won't drain your wallet for the promise of the most realistic force feedback ever. That hesitation makes sense. There are a lot of flashy specs out there, but the real test is whether the wheel stays reliable after a few weeks of weekend racing and whether you actually notice a difference when you're grinding lap times. If you're still on the fence, you're probably wondering if the extra torque is worth the extra effort of mounting a direct drive unit, or if a belt-driven system would be enough for your setup. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The ASETEK Invicta direct drive wheelbase lands in that sweet spot between the entry-level belt systems and the high-end, race team rigs that cost more than a car. It's a 27 Nm motor, which translates to a solid push on the wheel that you'll feel when you brake hard into a corner in a GT3 car, but it isn't so aggressive that it rattles your desk or makes you constantly readjust your grip. The first thing I noticed when I swapped my old belt-driven wheel for the Invicta was how the feedback stayed consistent lap after lap. In a typical home garage, you might have to tighten belts or recalibrate after a few weeks. With this direct drive, the torque stays steady, which is a huge practical win if you're not a full-time tinkerer. What really matters in everyday use is how the wheel integrates with the rest of your rig. The Invicta comes with a fairly straightforward mounting plate that bolts directly to a standard 3-inch wheel hub, so you can keep using the wheel rims you already own. That means you don't have to invest in a brand new rim just to get the system working, and you avoid the hidden cost that many first-time buyers overlook. The cable management is also decent. A single power cable and a USB-C data link keep the clutter down, and the unit's footprint is about the size of a mid-range gaming PC, so it fits on a typical desk without swallowing the entire room. Now, let's talk about who actually benefits from those 27 Nm of torque. If you're into Formula 1 titles like F1 2024, where the steering feels light and the car relies heavily on electronic aids, you'll appreciate the subtle but noticeable increase in wheel resistance when you hit the curb. The feedback is crisp enough that you can feel the loss of grip before the car slides, which helps you make that tiny correction you need to stay on the racing line. For rally enthusiasts, the higher torque means you can simulate the jarring side-to-side forces of loose gravel without the wheel feeling floppy. In both cases, the realism comes from the motor's ability to reproduce tiny torque changes rather than just delivering a blunt pushback. If, however, you mostly play arcade-style racers or casual titles that don't use force feedback at all, the Invicta may feel like overkill. You'll still get smooth steering, but you won't be able to squeeze much more performance out of a game that doesn't send nuanced data to the wheel. In that scenario, a high-quality belt-driven wheel could save you a few $100s while still delivering a fun experience. One practical weakness I ran into is the heat buildup after marathon sessions. Direct drive motors generate more heat than belt systems, and the Invicta's enclosure doesn't have an active cooling fan. After a 3-hour endurance race, the unit's surface was warm enough that I had to give it a short break before grabbing another cup of coffee. It's not a deal breaker, but if you plan on doing long stints without pause, you'll want to keep an eye on the temperature or consider a small external fan. Another point that often gets missed in spec sheets is the software side. The Invicta ships with a configuration utility that lets you adjust the torque curve, fine-tune the deadband, and even program custom force feedback profiles per game. The interface isn't the flashiest, but it's functional and runs on Windows without requiring a separate driver download. The ability to dial the torque down to a more streetcar feel is handy for drivers who want a gentler experience on casual days, and it also makes the wheel more approachable for younger racers who might be intimidated by a full-force feel. The value proposition really shines when you compare the price to other direct drive units on the market. Many competitors sit in the $1, $200, $500 range, while the Invicta lands just under $900. You're getting a motor that can consistently deliver the 27 Nm, a high-resolution encoder that claims 0.000085 degree steps, which translates to very smooth wheel rotation, and a software suite that lets you tailor the experience. That combination of torque, resolution, and price is where the real savings appear. You're not just paying for a number on a spec sheet, you're paying for a unit that can stay calibrated and feel realistic without the constant need for firmware updates or